In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove a CV carburetor from a 2006 Harley-Davidson Sportster. This applies to most Sportster models, and they all pretty much use the same hardware and the same tools. So for starters, we're going to use a 3/16 Allen wrench. We're going to get this air cleaner cover taken off so we can access the 3 T27 Torx bits behind that hold the air cleaner onto the actual carburetor body. Now we're going to take a 9/16 deep well and we're going to remove the breather bolts from the air cleaner support bracket so we can access the rest of the carb. Now we're going to loosen up the fuel line. This one's held on by a hose clamp because it was previously worked on by yours truly about 6 years ago. After we loosen that hose clamp, we're going to remove the fuel line so we have more room to work with the carburetor. And for when we remove it from the actual bike, it won't be in our way. Now we're going to use 2 3/8 wrenches and we're going to break loose the throttle cable jam nuts. We're going to fully collapse the throttle cables so that we can remove them from the butterfly valve on the carb. I didn't film this part, but all you have to do is pull out on the carburetor and it'll come out of the intake manifold itself, which will allow you access to remove the throttle cables. For the throttle cables, I like to pull up on the sheathing around them to get them out of the actual throttle cable holder. On the idle cable, there is a spring that is in that actual holder. You kind of have to slide up on it with a pick or a punch. Sometimes a flathead works. But then to actually remove the throttle cables from the butterfly valve, there will be a little notch in it and you rotate the cable to that notch and then slide out. There's a little barrel style piece on the end of the actual cable that fits perfectly in that slot. And once you have those removed, you can slide the sheathing the rest of the way out, get them out of the way so that we're ready to pull the carburetor off of the bike. For this section, we're going to use an 11/16 to break loose the nut on the back side of the choke cable, which will allow it to come out of the bracket that supports it so we can slide the carburetor further out away from the motor and actually pull the choke cable off of the body. Now you want to remove the vacuum line that goes to the VOS switch, which is the vacuum operated electrical switch. This controls your timing advancement, and it normally only operates at full throttle. So right here, you're going to use a 9/16 to actually break loose the other side of the choke cable. It can be kind of tricky. The easiest way is to just break it loose with the wrench and spin the carburetor until it comes off. Or you can just keep going with the wrench. It's plastic, so be very careful because the threads will break and strip very easily. Now that we have the carburetor off of the bike and in a safe working environment, we're going to use a Phillips head screwdriver to break loose the float bowl screws. Now with the float bowl off, you're going to use a 5/16 wrench to remove the main jet holder. Now using a flathead, we're going to break loose the pilot jet and get that out of there so we can clean both of these jets for proper operation when we put it back on the bike. Right here I'm using a little punch to punch out the pin that holds on the float itself. There's an arrow on the body of the carb that shows which direction you're supposed to punch the pin out. When reinstalling it, you just go the opposite direction. Once you get this float out, you want to make sure the needle valve's in good shape. I tend to replace them. I like to use the stock floats though and just clean them up as long as there's no damage or pinholes in them. Right here I'm using a little wire brush on my drill to clean out the inside of the float bowl. You want to make sure you get all the dirt and grime and all that trash out of there. That way when the accelerator pump fires, it doesn't suck up any dirt or debris. Now that your bowl's all clean, you're ready to take your accelerator pump and diaphragm out. What you want to use is a Phillips head screwdriver, break these 3 screws loose. There is a spring inside. Depending on what kit you get a replacement spring along with the diaphragm and the O-rings, but keep a solid hold on top of that accelerator pump cover just in case it decides to go, into space. Now that you're all cleaned up, I like to take a little bit of a fuel-safe grease and rub it on these bowl gaskets just to help it stay in there. They can be a little tricky. What you want to do is just be patient, take your time, use your fingers or something soft like a popsicle stick to press the gasket into the groove. For this next step, we're going to reinstall the accelerator pump, both O-rings and the diaphragm, along with the new spring. Again, you want to just press these O-rings in with your fingers and ensure proper engagement. They can tend to want to pop out, but just take your time, be patient, and get that full engagement in there. Now we're going to reinstall our jets. I cleaned them out with a tip cleaner for welding torches. That tends to work pretty well. If not, you can use some old throttle cable or strands of wire. Something small enough to get through these jets because they are pretty dang tiny. Now you're going to install a new needle. I like to make sure that the adjustment is correct after installing the float and the needle. Once you get that inside the body of the carb, you're going to want to push the pin for the float back through the body of the carb in the opposite direction of the arrow. Right here you can see I'm checking the adjustment. Pretty much you want the needle to seat before the float is like fully level, and then it to depress the pin just past level. All right, so now we're going to reinstall the actual bowl. Make sure that the lever for the accelerator pump goes through the little dust cover and into the body of the carb, and make sure that the accelerator pump jet actually sticks out of the mouth of the carb. So right here, I'm installing the choke knob first. I always do this first so that you can just hold the carburetor to the side and you have more range of motion to install the actual knob. Right now, I'm reinstalling the throttle cables. The one with the spring goes closest to the outboard side of the bike, and the one without the spring goes inboard, closest to the motor. These can be a little tricky to do. Sometimes you just kind of fiddle around with it. But it's very self-explanatory when you're looking at the part. There's a notch on the actual valve that controls the throttle plate, and that notch is for the cable. So make sure you get them around that actual butterfly valve so that you have proper operation when you go back to ride the bike. Once you got your throttle cables back on, you're going to reinstall the carb onto the intake manifold. There's a rubber gasket back there, and you want to make sure that you have positive engagement and that there's no wrinkles, rips, tears, anything of that nature. Okay, so now I'm reinstalling the fuel line. This one, like I said previously, has a hose clamp on it. If yours was never taken apart before you got it, it's either going to have a hose clamp or the factory style like crimp on. I recommend using a hose clamp in case you have to take the carb back off in some point in the future. It makes it a lot easier than having to cut one of those crimp on line clamps. So now you're going to reinstall your air cleaner backup plate. This is held on by the two 9/16 breather bolts that go into the head. You want to make sure that your holes for your air cleaner are lined up before you tighten these all the way down. A good rule of thumb is to make sure that you can thread in one of the screws to the actual air cleaner before you tighten everything down. But I mean, if you just visually check and make sure that all the holes are going to line up in the carburetor for the air cleaner, you're in good hands. Now it's time to install the air filter. You're going to reinstall the 3 T27 Torx bit screws and tighten those down nice and tight. You don't want to go too much because there is a possibility that you can strip the threads out on the carburetor or possibly break the screws. The good and tight method is really all you need. And now it's the air cleaner cover that's held on by two 3/16 screws. Make sure you got your little decorative plate on there. Once all this is done, we're ready to start the bike. Alright, so now you're ready to get back out on the road. I really hope this video helps you out. I hope it's easy to follow. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, let me know down below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, ride safe, ride smart, keep the rubber side down. We'll catch you in the next one. Peace.